And you may have just noticed recording in process. We will be recording the meeting tonight so we can share it with those who weren't able to join us. We'll be posting it on the project website. So I'd like to start out by reviewing some logistics as well as the meeting objectives and agenda before I invite council members Beer and Bowles to share some opening remarks, and appreciate your patience as I move through this first set of slides here. First, a quick Zoom tutorial. I know many or probably all of us are very familiar with Zoom, but just to make sure, everyone's Zoom screens and menu may look a little differently, but you should see a mute and unmute button. We ask that you please remain muted when you're not speaking, and then when it's your turn to speak during the Q&A portion of the meeting, we'll ask you to unmute, and then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. You also see the video button. Feel free to stay on or off camera, though it's always nice for us to see who we're here with. When we get to the Q&A portions of the meeting, you'll have the option of typing your question in the Q&A or raising your hand to verbally ask your question. So there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom menu there. And then also the reactions button is where you'll find the raise hand feature. You'll see the chat on your screen, and we ask that you use the chat only for technical support questions. If you have a Zoom related issue, you can get help from our tech support team through the chat, but we ask you to please keep the chat for tech support and go to the Q&A if you have presentation or project related questions. And then finally, you'll see the, the show captions button on the Zoom menu. And that's where you can enable closed captioning if you'd find that helpful, with the caveat that it's automated by Zoom, so the transcription is not going to be 100% accurate, likely. And then some of these options, if you don't see them right away, you might just need to click on the 3 dots on the right side of your Zoom menu to open up all of the options that are available. Just to review some quick meeting guidelines that we ask everybody to please adhere to. We understand that there's a variety of different opinions and perspectives about the project, and we ask you to please be respectful of those varying opinions by keeping your questions brief and related to the project and the presentation content, and also by giving space to others. If you see that there are others who have questions, if you could please, and you've already asked your questions, if you could please give others the chance to ask theirs. Also, please be patient if there's technical difficulties. We've come a long way in terms of technology, but there are sometimes glitches and things that are out of our control. Please do remain muted unless it's your turn to speak to help make sure we can hear the speaker. And please hold your questions for Q&A at the end, to the end of each presentation section. And I'll share more specific instructions on Q&A when we get to that first Q&A portion of the presentation. Our meeting objectives for tonight are to provide details on the preliminary design process for the project, explain the rationale on major design criteria and elements. We want to gather your feedback and input on features and amenities to prioritize within the subsections of the project area, and also on aesthetic themes of those features and amenities. And generally, we want to provide opportunities to engage and hear from you, and for you to engage with the city staff and project team. And just to give us sort of some structure of the agenda tonight, it's very aligned with these objectives. And as you'll see on this agenda, within each section, we'll have time for a brief question and answer session to address your questions related to the content shared in that section. Following this introductory section, we'll hear some opening remarks from our council members. And then we'll go into the more technical portion of the presentation. Aaron Holloway is a senior engineer at GHD and the project manager for the consultant team, and he'll give an overview of the design criteria. After Aaron, we'll hear from Louis White, who will present on the wave run-up and overtopping analysis. He's a coastal engineer with ESA. And then next up will be Lucas Piper, a landscape architect at GHD, to review features and amenities, introduce some conceptual designs for the new promenade, and share some options for aesthetic themes for materials and furnishings. And in that section, we'll be using Zoom polling to get your input on some of the features, amenities, and themes. And then toward the end of our meeting, I'll close out the presentation by reviewing the next steps for engagement. And then just want to note that in addition to the folks that I just mentioned who'll be leading portions of the presentation, we also have city staff and other consultant team members with us tonight to help respond to questions as needed. From the city, we have Roland Yip, Pacifica's Deputy Director of Public Works and City Engineer. He's the project manager for the city on this project. We have Lisa Peterson, Pacifica's Public Works Director. And then from the consultant team, we have Nick and Tom from GHD. Nick is a coastal scientist and project manager, and Tom's a landscape architect. And we have Eli from ESA. He's an environmental planner. And then we have Matt and Marlis from the Kearns and West team who are providing meeting and tech support. One more quick thing before I turn it over to the council members. We'd love to know a little bit about who's with us tonight. And we have a poll to try out Zoom polling with you and learn a little more about you. So you can see here that we have two questions. The first is, which of the following best describes your connection to the city of Pacifica? And we'd love to hear which of these options is, and you can select multiple if multiple apply. Give another 10 seconds to respond. Great. Thank you. And it looks like, unsurprisingly, we have a lot of Pacifica residents here with us tonight. And in addition to that, some folks who work here, own a business, own property, and or visit Pacifica. Thanks, everybody. And one more quick question, just to get to know those residents. If you do live in Pacifica, which of the neighborhoods listed here do you live in? Give it a couple more seconds and we'll close this one. Awesome. Thank you. We have a lot of Sharp Park folks with us tonight. Also some folks in Pacifica Manor, Edgemar, and Pedro Point. So thank you all for joining us. Appreciate you trying out the Zoom polling and helping us get to know you. And now I will turn it over to our council members, Christine Bowles and Mary Beer, to share some opening remarks with us.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mary Beer. I'm your city council member for District 3. I want to welcome everybody here tonight. And I'd also like for us to come together tonight in solidarity and in loving kindness, and for us to recognize that we're all here because we love our city so much and we want the absolute best for our city. So yes, I would appreciate that, just to stand with you in solidarity and loving kindness. I want to thank our city staff, Lisa Peterson and Roland Yip, for all of your hard work on this project. All of our contractors, thank you so much for being here. And I also want to thank everybody who either worked or showed up at the booth at the Fog Fest and shared information and ideas, especially Marlis. Did I say her name right, Katie? I was able to talk with her and then witness her talking to our community, and she did such a great job. So thank you so much for being there and for sharing information with our community in that way. I think was really effective. And so I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful council member, Christine Bowles. I'm handing it over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Katie. And thank you all really for being here, for taking your time out of your weeknight for this important project. So I'm Christine Bowles. I'm our newest council member, representing Manor, but also all the way to the first 2 blocks of Sharp Park and most of the seawall, interestingly, if you look at the election maps. But the truth is, we, all 5 of us, represent all of you, and we're all looking out for our whole city. And the other 3 council members would have liked to have been here very much, but you know, we're limited by Brown Act rules, and so it's Mary and I here today. I see Cindy Abbott is also here in our audience today, and I wanted to take a minute. She, as the director of the Sanchez Art Center back in 2020 and 2021, Cindy organized this wonderful art project called Sea Change. And I'm sure you can go to the Sanchez Art Center and go and see copies of this book. But different community groups came together to create new words around climate change and sea level rise and adaptation, because we know this is a scary topic for a lot of people. It's hard. There are no easy answers. But it's important for us to be honest and open and have conversations to move us forward to adaptation. And so I'm going to read one of the words today. It's the word is emergination. The origin are the words emerge, process of coming into being or becoming prominent, and imagination, the faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts. So the definition for emergination is seeing climate change as something that has already occurred, is occurring, and requires immediate change, while re-envisioning that change not as negative and instead as an opportunity. To realize the changes we need to make to address it may actually make our lives richer in many ways and more in alignment with our true selves. The future can possess our fantasies. This evolution in thinking requires imagination. So as we look at the presentation today, there are some exciting new things that we haven't thought about as a community before that our consultants are presenting. And so I really encourage you all to look at this with an open mind and imagination. And thank you.
Thank you so much for those inspiring words and helpful feedback, Councilmember Beer. Appreciate hearing that. And we did have fun at FogFest. We talked to over 300 people at our booth, so I feel like that was a really good opportunity, and I'm glad we were there as well. Also want to note that there was one neighborhood missing from our poll that we just launched, and I apologize for that, but we do have representation from Fairway Park with us as well. So apologies for that error. And then Matt,
and I want to say, and Pedro Point, I saw some people from there.
Yes,
also. Yeah,
there was some folks from Pedro Point. Yes. Thank you, Matt, for getting the presentation going again. And we'll be turning it over to Aaron here to walk us through the first technical section of our presentation.
Thank you, Katie. I'm going to give an overview of the design criteria as we are moving through the preliminary design phase of the project. So in phase one, we looked at alternatives, went through an analysis, and we identified the preferred alternative for the project, which consisted of a hybrid approach with a seawall, some rock scour protection, and beach nourishment. And so as we move into preliminary design, I just want to give a refresher on the design criteria, which provide guideposts for us as engineers in designing the structures and the size, the height, all those items. So the next slide, we'll highlight a few of the key criteria. So we're looking at a 50-year design life. That's based a lot on the longevity of materials, given the exposure in a marine environment like this. We're looking at likely using steel with reinforced concrete. And so as you can see from the sheet pile around the base of the concrete pier, steel is subject to a significant amount of corrosion. So that 50-year design life is built into the estimates for corrosion. As far as the storm event, we're going to be looking at something similar to the January 5th 2023 storm event. So large waves, high water level. We're looking at incorporating 2 feet of sea level rise into the design on day one, so that there'll be plenty of accommodation for future changes in water levels. We established kind of a tolerable overtopping range in a 0.5 to 1 CFS per foot, and Louis will get into more details on that in his presentation. And then of course, we'll be looking at stability of the wall under seismic loading, following a lot of design codes and guidelines you see here. The key one I want to talk a little bit more about is sea level rise. So on the next slide, we'll show kind of the sea level rise projections from the Ocean Protection Council's 2018 guidance. This guidance is set to be updated probably in the next few months. We don't expect there to be significant changes, but for our design life, where we're looking out 50 years, we're looking at that 2 to 3.5 foot range. So design life means how long is this wall going to last? So we want to make sure we have enough capacity to handle the sea level rise over that period. Now that's when we talk about design criteria and 2 feet of sea level rise, that's really what we're talking about. But if you look out past 50 years, you can see the sea level rise increases, and so does the uncertainty. You have a wider gap between the upper bound kind of worst case scenario and then the likely range. And so that's part of the planning criteria as we deal with questions and comments and back and forth with Coastal Commission and other regulators. They are going to want to know a little bit more about the longer time horizon of 75 to 100 years. And so that will be where we start to evaluate higher sea level rise amounts, more representative of the end of the century timeframe. Next slide, we'll talk about the alignment. The north wall and the pier wall will generally follow the existing seawall. We're looking into the constructability and the sequence of construction to understand kind of what that would look like. Generally, we're proposing a wall that follows just behind that existing wall, but generally along the same alignment for both the existing seawall north of the pier. And then the pier wall itself, the alignment of that new wall would probably be just outside that existing wall, but generally follow that alignment around the base of the pier. The south wall is where we have a little bit more opportunity as we go south of the pier. Beach Boulevard and the existing seawall diverge. And some of the major, challenges with this project include both funding and permitting. We've heard that from the community, we've heard that from the regulators. And so as we are looking at the south wall, we spent some time to investigate possible alternatives to, improve, will save cost to the project and also hopefully help in permitting as well. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at going through the alternatives we considered at the south end. So we looked at 3 alternatives. Alternative 1 is the seawall generally follows the existing alignment. And then alternatives 2 and 3 follow a more landward alignment closer to Beach Boulevard. The next slide, let's go to the next slide. I think it's a little bit easier to show these in a cross section. So the top is alternative 1, where we have a new wall generally located where the existing wall is. We have rock scour protection in front of that wall, and then we have a sandy beach as well. The height of that wall would be significantly higher than the one today. At the south end, it's about 22 feet. What we're looking at right now is if we put a new wall in that same position to satisfy our design criteria, that wall would be about 28 feet. So an increase of 6 feet, which would obviously further reduce views and from pedestrians and vehicles on Beach Boulevard. The second alternative is one in which with the existing seawall and rock would stay in place. And then there would be a new trail built, elevated trail built back along the parking lot on Beach Boulevard. So this would provide the elevation necessary to satisfy kind of the wave overtopping flood protection. And then also rely on the existing structure out there for scour protection and erosion protection. And then the space in between would be left open for beach and dunes, whether that takes the form of a dune restoration or whether that's left as a recreational area is kind of up in the air or to be determined. And then alternative 3 is the scenario in which that existing seawall and rock is taken away and replaced with a nature-based solution that consists of cobble and beach. And then similarly to alternative 2, an elevated trail along the back end, along that parking lot. So we took these 3 alternatives and we went through a multi-criteria analysis similar to what was done for phase 1. The next slide shows kind of the criteria. We have 3 categories of technical performance, financial, and environmental. All of these alternatives were evaluated kind of based on the flood erosion protection they could provide. Cost, we looked at initial costs, potential operation and maintenance costs, and then environmental looks at the natural resources out there today, how would the project impact those, and how would this alternative be viewed from a regulatory perspective. So the results of this analysis showed Alternative 3 as the clear favorite. From a technical performance standpoint, all the alternatives adequately satisfy the technical performance criteria. That is, they could satisfy the design event, which is extreme storm with 2 feet of sea level rise, as well as mitigating erosion. So the real differentiators came in with the financial and the environmental categories. Alternative 2, where that existing wall and structure is left in place, and then we have an elevated trail behind it, is the cheapest option. But again, there could be some operation and maintenance costs associated with future scenarios where we get a little bit of sea level rise, the beach is eroded, that wall is getting beat up, needs to be repaired, replaced, or removed. And then alternative 3 is a similar score on the cost perspective, a little bit higher cost initially, but lower cost long-term, less operation and maintenance. And then alternative 3 is really, differentiated by the environmental category, as viewed as likely the most favorable of these 3 options from a permitting perspective, just given the fact that the wall is pulled, or the elevated trail is pulled as far back as possible from the hazards. It frees up more beach and sand, provides a little more continuity between the golf course beach to the south and that trail, as well as the beach to the north. So generally the project team is recommending alternative 3 as we move forward into preliminary design, and this will be reflected on our preliminary drawings, the cost estimates, and the project description that we're drafting at this stage in the project to tee us up for the environmental phase, which would be next phase of the project. So just as we wrap up on the next slide, I think we have the key differentiators for that alternative 3. So we're recommending alternative 3, advance forward the elevated trail with nature-based strategies for erosion protection. This reduces the visual impacts of an elevated seawall in the current location, preferred for by regulatory agencies, continuity between beach and dune habitat, and also less cost. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Louis in the next stage, and he's going to talk through the wave run up and overtopping.
Actually, before we jump into
sorry.
Louis'
Yeah.
section, we're gonna pause for a minute, and we have an opportunity for Q&A here. And I did get a message asking if we can go back to show the Alt3 diagram again. So let me run through how Q&A will work, and then we can come back and show that visual again. But essentially, within each of these sections of the presentation, we will pause and have a Q&A. We want to focus on the content specific to the presentation topics that were just previously discussed. So this one will be about the design criteria. If you'd like to ask a question, you can use the raise hand button, and then I'll call on you when it's your turn to speak and allow you to unmute. Or if you would like to type a question to be read out loud, you can type it into the Q&A feature in Zoom. And if you're on the phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. And Matt, can you go back to the diagrams again and just, yeah, I think it was this one that we wanted to come back to, and just leave it here while we go through some questions initially. And I see Samuel. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. A few different questions. I understand here. I'm a little bit happier that I'm seeing that we're considering a more of a nature-based solution, but I think I still have questions around sort of what was said before, and then also what I perceived from the last meeting I attended at the community center. So one, why was there no analysis to determine if the best option is to move the pump station? I'm glad to see that we're considering looking at the nature-based solution, because the Coles Commission has already said it will reject the seawall along with sand renourishment. So we have to make sure we stay away from that sand renourishment is it not acceptable that we shouldn't be wasting taxpayer funds there? That would be more fiscally responsible and scientifically found to consider the relocation of the pump station. So why aren't we doing that? Also, state and federal guidelines determine projects should meet a 100-year design life, not a 50-year design life. So why are we accepting a project that will last actually less than 50 years? Also, why is a lower than expected sea level rise analysis being utilized, knowing that global warming is actually in the worst case scenario? Gases are going up. Last year, more coal was used than ever in the lifetime of the planet. So 2 feet of sea level rise is not acceptable. All scientific data, the scenario they say is using 10 feet because we are in the worst case scenario. So it seems a little irresponsible for me to think that we shouldn't be considering the worst case scenario. So why aren't we looking at more than 2 feet?
Thanks,
Also, why
Samuel.
are
I'm gonna pause you right there. I think it's gonna be really hard for our team to be able to respond to your questions. So let me just hold off for a second. I hear that you had
Sure.
questions about the pump station, the design life, and the sea level rise analysis. And I
Correct.
wonder if so far, and I understand you have more, but before we get to those, Aaron, do you want to respond to that? And then I also want to let you and everyone know that we do have we'd have office hours coming up, and we'll share more about that at the end of the presentation. But it sounds like you have some really technical questions and you've done a lot of research and you want to understand maybe more than we can possibly get to tonight. And so if that is true, then I want to point you to the office hours at the end of the meeting to you'll be able to actually schedule an appointment to talk more in depth with the project team. So if
No
that
problem,
feels like a
Katie.
better option
Yeah,
at the end, we'll do that.
no problem. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Aaron, do you want to respond to those first initial questions?
Sure, I'll take a shot and respond to, let's see, well, regarding the pump station, let's start there. So we did look in phase 1 about, what infrastructure is at risk, what would it take to realign, relocate that infrastructure. The pump station was included. And so we have costs on that information. But again, the pump station is just one aspect of the resources that are protected by this project. The coastal access along the promenade is an important one, access along Beach Boulevard, and then of course the utilities within that corridor, as well as access to the pier. I think the pier is a vital resource for the city and the region. So there's a lot protected by this project, and it would not, when we looked at those other relocation of different infrastructure, by just moving the pump station or the sewer line, you don't hit all the project objectives that we're trying to accomplish here with this project. In terms of what the Coastal Commission will or will not allow, so we've had several meetings with coastal staff, and we're still working through kind of the concerns, but they have not said outright, we would never approve a seawall. We're working at the staff level, and so the staff is looking at the Coastal Act, and does your project align with the policies of the Coastal Act? And so that's the lens we're looking through. And so a lot of that comes down to, what is existing infrastructure? Is shoreline protection warranted? And in this case, we think it is. And so we're working through that process with them. And of course, at the south end, where there is space between the wall and the infrastructure, that's why we're looking at sort of this nature-based strategy, because it makes sense there, and it is more in better alignment with the Coastal Act. And then in terms of sea level rise, we're looking at the probabilistic projections that have been provided by NOAA and a group of researchers. Those have been published about a year ago, and that's what the Ocean Protection Council is going to be including in their next update. And so in terms of probability, there's less than a 0.5% chance sea level rise exceeds 3.5 feet by 2070. So it just doesn't make sense to design for, something higher than that, which, the wall may not even last that long. So it just becomes kind of like a risk tolerance, capital cost analysis of how much protection should we be buying on day one, given these uncertainties as you go far out into the future. And my understanding of the 10-foot scenario is that's kind of a worst case, depends on a lot of different mechanisms that would happen far out in the future. And so the updated science that we can expect to see from Ocean Protection Council, I think has some modifications to that scenario. And I think they have essentially NOAA's guidance kind of removed that from consideration this century, saying it's more like a very long-term worst case scenario. So I hope that answers some of your questions, Samuel. I think, yeah, we can connect again in the office hours and talk through each of those in more detail, if that'd be helpful.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron. And Jeff, I see your hand raised. And I just want to remind everyone, if we could please keep the questions as direct questions as much as possible and related to the content, that would be really helpful. We'll take the question from Jeff, and then we're going to move on to the next section of the presentation. In the interest of time, we're already getting a little bit behind.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Thanks, Aaron. Quick question. First of all, it's disappointing that we don't have access to these slides, and I can't like go back and see the previous slide before this because I'm interested in seeing like the one that's overhead view. But yeah, that one. Which one is all three?
Alt 3 would be the one that it has the brown line that generally follows Beach Boulevard.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, but there's no seawall there. Is that correct? There's no seawall that's going along the parking area?
There would be a retaining wall because there will be a grade difference. So the
Okay.
parking area is about elevation 20, even a little lower. And
Okay.
this elevated trail would be up higher, at least 5 or 6 feet higher. So there will likely be some sort of retaining wall on the back end. And I think you'll see there'll be some better graphics illustrating kind of how the path works through this area later on in this presentation.
All right, thanks. And then this might be a question for later, but question about beach nourishment and the material that's being used. Where does it come from and what's the consistency of it? Is it sand? Is it rocks? What is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's a task. We're not going to get into detail on that today, but it is something that the team is working on, is
Okay.
looking at what sources are available, what size of beach sand are we looking at as far as the grain size. So that is a focus of this phase of the work.
And
we
then
just don't-
related to that, does the sand come from the ocean up? Is it blown onto the beach, or does it get dumped from below from Beach Boulevard?
Oh, that's a good question.
Typically-
I think it could be either one, to be honest. Depends on where the source is coming from. I don't know of any upland source where it would be economical to truck it in.
Yeah.
But so most likely it'll be placed from the beach side.
Okay, thank you.
Hydraulically.
Thanks for your questions, Jeff. I'm going to move us to the next section, and I imagine we'll keep in contact with you. And I also, your very detailed questions, I think are an office hours appointment would be a great place to talk more with you about a lot of these things too. Louis, you are up to talk to us about the wave run-up and overtopping analysis. Go for it. You need to unmute.
All right. Hello. I'm Louis White with ESA. I'm principal coastal engineer with ESA, and I've been part of the team through phase 1 on this project and continuing now. And following up on Aaron's presentation, I was going to go over some of the wave run-up and overtopping analysis, the technical studies that we've been doing to look at basically the flood mechanisms at this project site and how they inform the design. Next slide. So what are the flood mechanisms? So essentially it's these terms that I'm going to be using is wave run-up and overtopping. And wave run-up is the uprush of waves on the shore, on the structure, and as they move up. And if you've been out to Beach Boulevard, you've seen waves rushing up over the seawall and up into the air, and then overtopping the seawall and rushing landward. And so overtopping is that process of waves that are breaking over the seawall and moving water across the land. And these kind of events happen during different types of combinations of storms and non-storm events even. When there's a high tide and storm surge, that contributes to the high water levels, and then you can have waves that will break over the wall. Sometimes with even lower water levels and really big waves, you can get the overtopping too. But generally, it's during high water level conditions. It's just easier for the waves to overtop. And so the idea is in the design of this project, looking at the frequency of these overtopping and how often is it happening and what level of damages does it create. So it's looking at the level of risk to inform how the seawall will be designed and the project will be designed. And so right now, the existing condition, it's really a marginal level of protection where it gets overtopped and flooded and there's disruptions, and it costs the city a lot of resources to go and make repairs or cleanups. And as we know, with sea level rise, just even on the order of 1 or 2 feet, that's going to make the problem worse with more frequent and greater damages during flood events. Next slide. So here's some examples of the wave run up. And if you hit the next slide button again, you'll see that this red line denotes what we call the total water level. It's the elevation of that wave run up. And so the wave rushes up the structure and then it overtops and then it floods the landward side. And these pictures show north of the pier on the January 5th, 2023 event, and water rushing down the street just from waves overtopping the seawall. Next slide. And south of the pier, there was similar overtopping in the past in other significant storms in, say, like 2016 when the pier was damaged or the seawall was damaged. There was not as much overtopping in the south part of the project area because of the beach conditions, I think, were slightly different. But for this particular event on January 5th, in the direction of the waves for that storm and the size of the waves and the height of the water level, we had a lot of overtopping down there. And you can see it from these pictures that were taken from a webcam footage and showing these waves breaking up and over the seawall south of the pier and contributing to the flooding. Most of the drainage is to the south, and on the picture on the left, you can see all that water rushing down toward the south end of the site where it collects. And there's a pump station that can get stopped up with sand that gets deposited over the seawall as well. And this particular storm moved a lot of sand over the wall and deposited it through the whole area. Next slide. Oh, and here's the total water level again, just as an example. Next. So as for the project designers that are designing the seawall, we have to consider the existing condition of the grades and also the coastal conditions. And so right now, the existing wall height varies and the elevation of the wall crest varies from north to south. Generally, it's a little higher in the north, and then there's an area where the grades increase slightly and then they decrease back down as you approach the south. And so what we're doing is this coastal study to help inform selection of design elevation based on these coastal run-up calculations and coastal modeling to inform how high the wall should be, because there's a trade-off as you keep increasing the height of the wall. As you increase the height of the wall, you're going to reduce your flood risk, but you'll also impact your visual resources. And so the property owners and people in their cars or walking along the sidewalk could potentially be blocked. Their views could be blocked potentially by the seawall if it gets built too high. And so the team is looking at design alternatives to mitigate those visual impacts. I think Lucas is going to present some information later that presents ideas of, well, elevating the promenade. So as you increase the side of the seawall, you can also increase the promenade sidewalk along with it. There's also opportunities for overlooks and other amenities and approaches. But this is something that's going to be looked at the next stages through during the CEQA process. It focuses on stuff like this, the visual impact. Next. Now to dial into the wave overtopping and the real technical meat behind it, this slide is trying to show the amount of analysis that we've done to help inform how high the wall should be to reduce this flood risk. And so if you hit the next slide button, so what these charts show, the left, there's 3 panels. The panel on the left is for 0 feet of sea level rise. The middle panel is for 2 feet of sea level rise, and the right panel is for 3.5 feet. Now on the vertical axis of these charts is the wall crest elevation, and on the horizontal axis is the overtopping discharge. So the volume of water per time that's being brought over the wall by waves. And so as you increase, this blue box that's on each of the graphs shows what Aaron pointed out as the tolerable discharge limit, which is between 0.5 and 1 CFS per foot. And this is an average rate. And these equations here, or the different colored lines on each of the graphs, are represented by some equations that were published by a Eurotop overtopping manual that is the standard of practice for looking at overtopping rates for engineering studies. And so as we look at increasing that wall, and I'll mention that the 3 different lines represent different levels of storm events. And so the 2-year event is something that happens like approximately once every 2 years. So it's very likely to see that kind of an event. The 10-year event is the yellow line, which happens about has a probability of happening on about 10% on any given year. And now a higher, more extreme event was something like what we experienced on January 5th, which it competes with the 1983 El Nino event, which was another really big storm event, which has up till now has been considered the storm of record for most of the California coast. And so what we see here is as you increase the height of your wall elevation, you can decrease the overtopping rate. And so what we want to do is try to find for the existing and design conditions, what's the appropriate height elevation of the wall for this particular cross section that was analyzed here. And hit the next slide. And so this dashed line shows the elevation, approximate elevation of the existing wall, about 26 feet relative to NAVD, which is an elevation datum. And so that wall crest is about 26 feet. And I'll hit the next slide. And if we were to increase the wall by about 4 feet here, shown by the green line, we can reduce, for 2 feet of sea level rise, we can reduce the overtopping rate from about 3 CFS per foot down to about 1 CFS per foot, closer to the tolerable threshold. Next. And now higher sea level rise would be even a greater amount of required wall height to keep the wall design within a tolerable threshold. So that you're looking more like 6 feet here. So the question is, where do we live with the right wall height? And that's where we're at with this technical analysis, and we're refining these calcs and getting through that. Next. And so to inform all this work, we've also set a data collection program in process We recently deployed a buoy offshore of the project site. It's located a mile offshore and is collecting wave height and water level data right now. We're planning on installing some other instruments out on the pier to collect water levels and through the surf zone. And all this is it to help us inform the design of the wall, both from a structural standpoint and also from the elevation standpoint to manage flood risk. Next. And here's just a graphic from our web interface that shows our buoy data that's being collected in real time. And I think that does it for my slides.
Great, thanks, Louis. We have another couple minutes available now for Q&A. Really want to make sure that we're focusing on questions related to the content that Louis just presented, and ask that if you have a question, you either type it into the Q&A or raise your hand, and keep your questions just to one at a time so we can get through them and give everyone the chance to speak, to ask. All right, Samuel, I see you're raising your hand. Can ask you to unmute, and please keep your question brief if you can, and help us get back on schedule here.
I'm sorry, Katie. I only asked one question this time.
Thank you.
We keep talking, first of all, we keep talking about sort of seawall, retention wall, whatever you want to call it. We'll just call it a wall. But my final question is that why aren't we considering the impact of wave and storm surge force that will have a negative impact effect north and south of the project? So have we analyzed that? I didn't see that anywhere. And so because of that, has the State Land Commission, the city of San Francisco, who owns the golf course, the GGNRA, and the unprotected homes north of the project been consulted?
Thank you, Louis. Is that something that you're able to answer? Is that something we can follow up with or respond in the future?
I don't think that's a question for me. I mean, I think that sounds more like a process-based, big picture kind of political question for others, part of the permitting
Yeah, I can
process.
just
maybe.
quickly answer that, we have not done specific outreach to adjacent property homeowners. We have heard from some through these public engagement activities, but if the analysis of impacts will be the focus of the next phase of work as we move into the environmental documentation. So that will involve analysis of the specific impacts you're alluding to, and then as well as, specific noticing to adjacent residents.
Great, thank you. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. One is, do we have access to the SOFAR buoy data?
Am I still on here?
Yep.
We don't have it publicly available right now. We have our own API set up to access the data from SOFAR servers, and we're not able to make it publicly available in real time. But I think you could ask the city if for the data if you need it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. One more minute for questions, and then we're going to move on to the next section of the presentation. I see another question in the Q&A, and it's being responded to currently, so you'll get a response to that shortly. Great. I think we can move on to the next section. Lucas, you are up. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you. And I think we're a little over 10 minutes behind schedule here, so I'll try to be brief. But for me, this is a pretty exciting topic because we're talking about the human engagement, human use of the promenade. So As you heard from Louis and from Aaron, any design alternative with the seawall will ultimately result in a change of condition, physical change with the site, with elevating the seawall. And by elevating that seawall, we want to look at different opportunities for how we can get people, up, circulated onto the promenade, how we can limit the obstruction of views, and how we can get people to use and enjoy that space. So through this part of the presentation, it's going to be broken into two different sections. One where we talk, I'll be discussing the current design, our preliminary design concepts, and be looking for feedback on the type of amenities and features and furnishings that that the public would like to see backfilled within the space. And on the second half of the presentation, we'll look at getting input on the overall theme. So the character, the materials, the color, and the types of style of furnishing that we can get feedback to help influence what materials and what types of styles of furnishings we then backfill on the promenade. So before we begin, I think Katie, you have maybe a question here regarding the future envisioning use of the promenade.
Yes, we wanted to start out with a poll and would love everyone's input on this. How do you envision the future use of Beach Boulevard Promenade? And select one that you think will be your most commonly way to use Beach Boulevard Promenade in the future. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds to answer here. Let us know whether you plan to walk, bike, or potentially drive along as your highest use. All right, I'm going to end this poll, and it looks like we have mostly folks who will be walking or jogging along the promenade. A couple folks who also think they'll be biking or using other sorts of micromobility, and a few who also plan to drive along Beach Boulevard. So that's helpful for us in planning. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. And, thanks for doing that polling, Katie. And, it's good practice because we got quite a few polling questions through this part of the presentation. So if we can go to the next slide here. Seeing the results of the poll is encouraging because it's in line with, kind of what we've heard through previous engagement steps. It also aligns with other desired characteristics and considerations for Beach Boulevard Promenade in the larger Sharp Park specific plan, which envision the space, the corridor, looking at different connectivity with pedestrian access, connections to the larger communities and communities to the north and south of the boulevard. What we heard in the past too was in line with what we're hearing today with the boulevard and the promenade being a pedestrian focus. In the past, we polled regarding, providing a green corridor with more planting. What we heard during that was, the difficulties of the harsh environment, and the difficulty would be to establish some plantings. So looking at strategic locations where we could include some landscaping along the corridor, and then also really maintaining the views of the people out of their vehicles, walking on the promenade, while also recognizing that in order for people that don't live necessarily right in the community that are walking in, that we are looking to maintain a certain level of parking, if not increasing parking for people to get out of their vehicle and then use the promenade. And as we go looking at the larger, the whole promenade, as well as enlargement areas, we're going to be looking at different input on the desired amenities and furnishings that we can use and that will be used by the public along the promenade. So you can see a list there of previous input that we've gotten regarding the desired amenities for the promenade. So if we go to the next slide here, looking at the full concept layout, this is a preliminary design that we've come up with. The first thing I want to point out with this is that the overall design, it is very preliminary. It's subjective to a lot of different levels of input, primarily from public input as well as city input, and also through permitting. Any design change that we're doing, physical change of this existing promenade seawall will require, kind of more specifically, the Coastal Commission, and that will have to have an approval process. So what we're showing now, just keep in mind that this may change, there might be some adjustments. What you see on the plan here, the yellow dash lines, or sorry, the white dash lines, are where we have some cross sections where we can show that change and that elevation adjustment from the existing road elevation to the promenade and then to the seawall. The areas that are identified as the North Promenade, the Pier Plaza, and the Dune Promenade, Southern Promenade, are areas where we'll have some enlargements that we can look at the design in a little bit more detail. And it's also important to notice that in terms of that southern gap, we're designing to try and fill that gap, as well as can make connections both to the north and south to and inland, going inland, so we can connect the people biking, walking, and going to the shoreline. And I think we have a polling question here too, and this will focus on getting input on the desired amenities and furnishings for the corridor as a whole. So as you look at the corridor as a whole, I'll let Katie kind of walk through the question, but we're really looking for input on looking at it as a full project, what type of amenities are preferred.
Okay. Here we go. This poll is called Promenade Features and Amenities, and we're asking you to please select the features and amenities from the list below that you're most interested in seeing along the Beach Boulevard Promenade. And if you could please select up to 3 from the list, which includes beach access, trash, recycling, and compost bins, public art or decorative paving, interpretive signage, water stations, viewing plazas, platforms, public towers, plantings or other landscaping, lighting, walking, biking, micromobility connectivity, or additional parking. So it's a lot of options. We'll give you a couple minutes on this one. Please select your top 3. Let me give a couple more seconds. I think it looks like folks are starting to slow down with responding. All right. I'm gonna end the poll, and it looks like we have beach access as a anticipated likely use and desired feature there. And another top one looks like trash recycling and compost bins, plantings and other landscaping features, bike ped connectivity is up there. There's a few that stand out, although it looks like folks would like to see kind of everything at the same time too. So I'm going to end that one. And then I think we have one more question here, Lucas. Oops, sorry. Go ahead with the next one, Matt. All right, a second question here about restrooms. Please indicate where you feel temporary or permanent restrooms are most needed. The north part of the promenade, around the Pier Plaza, near the Chit Chat Cafe, or the South Promenade? Let me just give a couple more seconds, because this is a more straightforward question. All right, thank you. And we have a clear winner that folks would like to see a remodeling of the existing facility. A couple folks also interested in the South Promenade area for restrooms. So thanks everyone. Lucas, I'll let you take us into the next section.
All right, great. So if we, on the next slide here, focusing in on that north plaza area that was identified on that previous slide. So at the north end here, we have an opportunity to provide kind of an endpoint, but also a connection to the not only the beach, but also potentially the community to the north through that shoreline access, providing a step down amenity feature to this view plaza where we can get views out and engaged into with the ocean as opposed to a kind of a through circulatory network on the promenade. We also have some constraints with maintaining existing driveway access to access that vacant lot, private lot behind that people currently tend to park in. We also have potential for possibly realigning the corner on Paloma Avenue to allow for additional and consolidated on-street parallel parking. So we can get some additional parking up on this northern end and focus in areas where we have the short line access, we have the plazas, and you'll see on the overall is kind of small, but you might have seen focusing those kind of in the north, the middle, and the south. Something to note on this design too, and we can probably go to the next slide to highlight, is that we're looking at a tiering down of the plaza. So getting people from the higher elevated plaza, where at this location, you can see on the cross sections on the northern end, the seawall is already a little bit higher, is higher and is in its existing configuration. So the proposed isn't going to elevate as much in this northern area. So we're not going to have to accommodate for that adjustment between the road elevation and the promenade. So you can see the existing conditions and the proposed. We're really looking at opportunity for backfilling that space with amenities and consolidating that parking. So we have some areas where you can widen out that promenade. And then on the visualization here, you can see a lot of the elements that I discussed in the plan view, where we're providing ADA ramp access down to a viewing platform, give the opportunity to sit, enjoy, relax, read, and engage with the shoreline and beach in a different environment than along the upper promenade. And one thing to note on this, and it leads into our next polling question, is that we have this, flat workspace, the paving horizontal space that is open right now, and we have opportunities for adding different amenity features and furnishings. So, thinking about just this North Promenade Plaza area for the next polling question here, Katie can read through it, but we're looking for different idea on amenities for just this specific location.
Yeah, so for this question about the North Promenade, we're asking for the North Promenade concept, please select the features and amenities from the list below that you're most interested in seeing. And we'd like you to select your top one, it looks like. So it'd be single seating and benches, group seating and picnic tables, a bike rack, play structure, or public art.
One thing, if I can jump in here too, with the public art installations, this isn't to say that we'd only provide art installations at one key location or at plaza locations. When we say installations, this would, since we have a larger plaza area, this would be somewhere that we could do, an actual structure or a combining a play structure with a art installation. There's the idea of, mural space, paving design along the full promenade where we can integrate, different art aspects into the full promenade, but this would be more of a structure opportunity.
Great, thanks for that context. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds here. It looks like folks are still responding. All right. It looks like we have a lot of folks interested in seating and benches, a split between single individual type seating and group seating, and then some people who'd also like to see bike racks and public art. So It's great information for us. Thank you. And we'll have a similar type question for the next two sections that Lucas is going to walk us through. And I will also let you all know that there's a survey with all of these questions live as well. So at the end of the presentation today, we'll make sure to share the link with you so you can take that as well and share with your neighbors.
Great, and I don't know if I'm doing a good job at consolidating my part here. But so moving to the Pier Plaza here, a lot of the same considerations. So maybe I can be a little quicker with this. At this section, you'll probably notice one difference is we have a bike lane along the road. So trying to separate the uses between pedestrian, walking on the promenade and people on bikes down on the road. Also on this section, if we go to the next slide, you'll see that as we move further south along Beach Boulevard and along the seawall, we run into a situation where the proposed seawall is going to be higher than the existing. So looking at the existing conditions and the proposed conditions down there, we're trying to show that relationship where the seawall, between the road and the seawall, there's going to be about a 6-foot elevation difference. I believe the seawall at this cross-section location, kind of near the pier, the road elevation is around 24 feet elevation. And the seawall, if we're maintaining that 30-foot elevation accommodation for the 2-foot sea level rise, then it's a 6-foot difference. So how we're trying to accommodate and break up that elevation difference would be to use that seawall as a fall barrier, as somewhat of a parapet wall. Then that would cut about 3.5 feet down to the promenade elevation level, which would only be about 2.5 feet up above that road elevation. Be able to soften up that wall with some planting and kind of have a stepping up effect. On the visualization here on the left, you can see again, kind of using the same concepts and thoughts, providing that ADA access ramp down to a viewing platform, a plaza space available for amenity installation. And then this is kind of where that existing steps that go down to a mossy approach to the revetment. So we would be redoing that and potentially integrating some type of stepping stones going down over that cobble to get down to the low tide access. So with that, we'll do a similar polling question.
Okay, same kind of question here for the Pier Plaza concept. Please select the features and amenities from the list below that you're most interested in seeing, and we'd like you to actually select the top one for this area as well.
And one thing I'll say too is you can see on the current design, we do have opportunity for some built-in seating with those steps, integrating the steps with seating and with the wall adjustment where we step down. So by the design we currently have, we've already built in some seating opportunity. I think that this question would be probably an encouragement on that approach, but also potentially encouraging additional separate furnishings for seating.
All right, looks like we're slowing down on the responses. We got one more. We give it a couple more seconds and then close this one. If anyone else wants to get their response in, now's your chance. Okay. It looks like single seating is desired here, and then some group seating, bike rack, and public art installation are all on the list, but single seating is the clear winner in this area. Thank you. Moving on to the next section.
All right, so the last focal area here is on that southern, where the kind of current park type area is. This is assuming moving forward with the alternative 3 with pulling the seawall back closer to the parking. But looking at areas where we can kind of, instead of having that seawall be just offset of the current road edge alignment, having areas where we can pop out for different viewing and amenity plazas. In this area, we are also playing with the concept idea of having a separated bike lane. The reason for this is a couple fold. One is to, again, reinforce that idea of pulling the bikes off of the elevated amenity plaza, but also provide, since at this location we have a similar situation where the parking elevation is at elevation 20 roughly, and we're pulling the seawall up to a proposed elevation of 26. So we have a 6-foot elevation difference, so providing some horizontal buffer space between the parking and that elevated promenade. We're also looking, as Aaron and Louis pointed out, with the in that alternative 3, having the opportunity for either dune or beach expansion, pulling that closer to the parking area, and then looking at ways that we can provide connection from the amenity space, being sensitive to the environment, to the potential restored dune with some plantings through the use of boardwalks. The boardwalks would have opportunity for seating. They would have connections to get to the beach, to that existing beach, just seaward of that seawall. And then also to note here that I brought up during the overall view is that at that Clarendon Road, we have a current break in that existing seawall, so closing the gap, but also providing a connection to the coastal trail on the south end. And if we go to the next slide here, again, another visualization of one of those amenity bump outs of the wall line, of the proposed wall alignment. And in this one, we're showing a little bit more of what that could be in terms of individual and group seating, seat walls. We're looking at the promenade elevation, pulling that up and not necessarily using the wall then as a fall barrier or a parapet, but using that as a seat wall, because the dune and beach would come up pretty much just below that. And then we show some visualizations down on that bottom visualization of some of that kind of artwork integrated with play structure. And you can see on the right here with the existing conditions versus the proposed, we're pulling the wall back, but we do have a change in condition adjacent to that parking where we're using that bike lane to buffer that jump up in the promenade. And again, we'll ask the same question regarding input on the amenities.
Yep, here it is for the South Promenade. Please select the top feature and amenity from this list that you're most interested in seeing. The same list that you are now familiar with. Give it a few more seconds here. Great, thank you. And in this area, it looks like group seating and picnic tables are the higher desired feature, with folks also interested in single seating benches, bike rack, and a play structure.
Looks like we have a running theme of desired for use, which, going back to our kind of overall concept planning for this was to look at allowing for that seating. So I know that people use that promenade for walking up and down, jogging, exercise, but having those plaza spaces available too, to have people be able to get off the circulation network and be able to have those seating opportunities. So that's good to hear. So I believe that wraps up. Does it wrap up our amenity discussion? And I think we're into Q&A.
Yep, we can do a quick Q&A here for questions related to those concepts that Lucas reviewed. And we do have another short section of our presentation where there'll be an opportunity to provide more input on visual themes for furnishings and amenities. So Jeff, I see your hand. I'll ask you to unmute and give you, if you could please ask a short question, help us stay on schedule.
You got it.
Thank you.
Just real quick, it looked like from your diagram that bike traffic only went one way. I see that Tom is replying to my question, but he's been replying for a while. Is that the case? Because like I'm on the south side, I ride north, from the south to the north, and then I ride back. Do I have to leave the Beach Boulevard to go the other way?
So to answer that question, I think Tom's providing a response as well, like you said, but a couple things to note on that is providing based on the width and on the roadway that we have, it would be unsafe to have both directional traffic. We do provide two-way traffic where we can separate that down on the southern end, but you're right, as we go further north, it is only single direction. There is a large goal of this project to tie it in with the larger Sharp Park kind of vision plan, which does include those connections to go, landward and have the bike networks that would kind of do that one-way traffic.
Okay, that's not gonna work, but okay, I'll be riding in the pedestrian traffic like I do now. Just saying.
Okay, and another thing is with that focus on the, that we've been getting feedback with the pedestrian use of the plaza. We've tried to look at putting the, biking on top, with the pedestrian plaza.
think
But
that's
we're
better.
really eating into that space. So we have a lot of competing,
Right, I think
you know,
it's better
desire.
to combine the two and get rid of the designated bikes, then you can use. It's wider for everybody. And it's not, I don't see that as a problem of mixing, but it is when you separate them, then
Thank
it's a
you.
problem.
Yep.
Thank,
Thank you,
And we're
Jeff, for
still
your
looking at
input.
that too. Yeah, we haven't made final decisions. This is all conceptual. So, that is definitely still on the table. So thank you.
And I see Patricia has a question. I'm going to ask you to unmute. If you could please go for it and ask your question.
Oh, okay. I've lived here for about 6 years and everybody talks about parking problems, and the city owns that giant lot, an empty building, unused across the street from the pier. Is there any planning going into using that space for parking, food kiosks? People have no place to stop and buy a sandwich in Pacifica except for the Chit Chat Cafe. So it's just been ignored on this project. I think there should be no car parking on Beach Boulevard, just access to a big lot right there, like Rockaway.
Thank you for your question. I don't know if Roland or someone from the city wants to address that one.
Hi, Patricia. Just want to clarify, are you talking about on the south side of the pier?
I think
Talking
you're
about
2212 Beach Boulevard, where the city council chambers are, the old sewage station.
the old abandoned sewage treatment plant, the old empty eyesore lot that the city owns.
Yeah, so that's the council chambers, and we're using that old treatment plant office for our council chamber meetings.
Yeah, you're
We're
building a
also-
giant new building for your council chambers in City Hall. That has been abandoned for decades.
I think that for this question, since it's unrelated to the Beach Boulevard project that we're here to talk about, I'm going to table this one, but maybe that's something you can follow up with the city directly on. We only have 10 minutes left in our meeting, and I want to make sure we can get through the next section and hear from you in the polling questions. So Lucas, why don't you go ahead with the next section?
Yeah, that's Patricia. You can go ahead and contact me directly at the engineering office, and I can, I'll be happy to answer your questions.
We'll put Roland's contact information in the chat directly to you, Patricia.
Great, and not to overstep or overspeak here, but we have also talked about different opportunities with potentially pulling the promenade out there to allow for opportunities for, say, outdoor, farmers markets, or, selling opportunities, or, food vendors, things like that, that we're kind of in a very preliminary stage of reviewing, how we could go about doing that and what the opportunity exists. So. Okay, so moving into the second part, Hopefully this one will go a little quicker because after I introduce it here, we kind of have a series of categories that we'll be asking to select one or the other. So looking at different overall themes, it's important to note that we're really talking just about the character, the feel, the look, not about the exact, bench that we're going to show or the exact fencing. So in this section, we're trying to get some feedback on two different theme options that we've developed. One is kind of a bohemian coastal theme that when we say that word, that phrase, what we're looking at is, use of wood, weathered material, using free forms, use of more cooler earth tones with potential pops of color, and then also natural materials. The other theme would be a more modern theme. So think cleaner lines, sleek look, use of concrete, metal, and more angular projections. These themes were based off of some previous city precedents. So that includes input from the phase 1 discussion, as well as the Sharp Park specific plan that's in a draft form, which I would also point to that in terms of kind of envisioning of the larger connection of Sharp Park with the Beach Boulevard. And then also some recent projects, including the Civic Center and the library. So some of the themes that you'll see in that Sharp Park specific plan connect to some of the themes that you hopefully will have seen running through the promenade proposed concept, which include those connectivity themes, the resiliency, the sustainability, the adaptability, and then also the preservation of that seaside atmosphere. So these themes fall in line with that. So if we go to the next slide here, looking at some previous precedents with the architectural precedents, you can see that the existing precedents with the newer development and the envisioning of Palmetto and Montecito. So I believe that's kind of at that corner that Patricia, you were talking about, but on the Palmetto side. They have more of this kind of modern aesthetic, a little more updated. And so this is some of the already approved and envisioning of future development in the area. So using this kind of as a basis for moving forward with the two different themes that we offer. If we go to the next slide, starting with our first category here, so looking at site furnishings. Again, just look at the feel, the kind of appearance that these provide you. When we talk about site furnishings, we're talking about benches, different art installation or different play structures, drinking fountains, trash, bike racks, those kind of things. So don't look at the individual design, because we're not saying we're going to pick that, exact manufacturer. We're saying, look at the feel and which one speaks to you. So we'll open up the polling question here. So on this one, just simple, out of just kind of looking at the two, which one sparks interest and would you like to see as a guide for as we move forward with the preliminary design and material selection? I'll give about 10 more seconds here. And I apologize if I'm rushing here, but I think we can. I don't know, Katie, are you sharing it? You're the master here, so.
It is being shared.
Okay.
It looks like a strong preference for Bohemian Coastal.
It does. It does. All right. Well, that's good to hear. And one thing also with these polls as we move through them, the information, the feedback that we receive will help not just inform the overall theme of the furnishings materials that will be kind of leaning on when moving forward with the preliminary design for the entire promenade. But if there is a strong leaning, say, for Bohemian for overall polling, but then one of these categories comes back, say we like modern lighting, then we can do a Bohemian theme with a modern lighting kind of flair. So let's move on to the next one. So looking at railing and fencing, again, same polling question. We can pull that up. and take your pick while looking at these two different themes, which one you'd like to see. We'll give about 30 seconds for this as well.
All right, it looks like it's pretty evenly split with a little bit of a stronger preference for modern in this case for railing fencing. An interesting twist.
Interesting twist, yeah. And your 30 seconds is faster than mine, Katie. All right.
We have 3 minutes left of our scheduled meeting time, so.
Okay, well, let's
5
go through
questions are
these
gonna-
then. Yep.
Yeah.
So
we're
we'll
gonna
do
make it
20
snappy.
seconds each. So on the, okay, next slide here. So there's paving and surfacing. Again, you know, through previous engagement, there were questions regarding, you know, ADA with some of the textured paving surfaces. You know, obviously, anything that we move forward with would be ADA compliant. But the idea would be that, you know, maybe tiled versus, you know, a more sleek, smooth, or, you know, brushed finish color, integrated color paving opportunity for the modern.
5 seconds more. Oh, I think Matt ended that one. Thanks, Matt. We're evenly split, Bohemian, coastal, and modern for paving and surfaces.
All right, great. The next one here is wall materials. So on the left there, we can pull up the polling question while I kind of entertain, I guess, while we poll. So on the Bohemian, you can see, you know, I think one cool thing to point out here is the opportunity of possibly doing some living seawall, you know, with that bottom image, putting some, is that pulling up or did I close it? Oh, it's up. No, that's paving surface still. Do I need to do that, Katie, or do you have
No, I think Matt's about to do it.
Okay.
Matt's been running the polls
Oh, okay.
behind the scenes. Yeah.
Gotcha.
There we
go. Okay. So again, the Bohemian, you know, would be a little bit more of a natural touch as opposed to the modern, creating kind of those straight edge lines and projections.
I'm going to end this one because it was fast. People got right in there. Thank you.
They like the
And
Bohemian. Yeah, I think I kind of sold it.
Yeah. Move
All
on to the
right.
next one.
Moving on to the next one. You're juggling a lot here, Matt, between clicking and clicking. So art installations, again, you know, you can kind of see a clear contrast here between the Bohemian style and the modern when it comes to potential, you know, stylings and form and line that we had used for either option here. So once the polling questions, we'll have about 20 seconds here to pick between the two here.
All right. I'm going to end this one. And pretty even, slight preference for modern in this case.
All right. And on to, I think we got 1 or 2 more here. Okay, so lighting options, again, same polling question.
You're pulling that one up, Matt. I know you're juggling slides and polls. There we go. Thank you.
Rapid fire.
Fast.
I think we're in a flow now.
Yes. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. We got Bohemian Coastal this time around.
And for those that, I know this is going pretty quick at the end here. I think it was mentioned before, but this survey is also available online that, can take a little more time and share with some friends, with other neighbors to help get additional information for us. So next slide here. So then now to signage. So this is not just identification, place identification, creating a sense of place with the signage, but also interpretive sign opportunities. And everyone's gonna make it tough on us. So what we've done in the past when we've gotten kind of splits on this is that we kind of do a hybrid theme as well. So we find kind of ones that, have aspects of each.
Like we have a preference for Bohemian Coastal for this one. All right.
And do we have one more, or are we to the Q&A? Q&A.
Q&A. We are over time, but I want to give 5 minutes for folks to ask clarifying questions if there are any. Obviously, we're at the end of the main content of our presentation, and we're just at over 7:30. So if folks need to leave, of course, feel free to. But we give it another 5 minutes for questions in the chat, or raise your hand if you have any questions. Sorry, not the chat. The Q&A is what I meant to say. All right. Not seeing any questions. So let's run through these last slides here. Just wanted to recap some next steps. We're here at public meeting number 2 and the preliminary design presenting to you with the features and amenities. Our team will be at work kind of going through what we've heard and moving the design further along so that by winter time we'll be able to come back to you with a third public meeting with some additional design information, and then we'll move into the environmental phase from there, continuing to do regulatory agency engagement all throughout that time. And I can give you a little bit more detail on the next slide of what some of our other upcoming engagement activities are. We have the project website where you can find all the materials from this phase that has been made public so far. And as we said in the chat and the Q&A, we'll be adding the meeting materials from this meeting and the video recording to the website. You can sign up for our email list and submit comments on the website as well. We have a survey that is live right now, and if it's not currently linked to the website, it will be soon. And Matt or Marlis, would one of you be able to drop the survey link in the chat so everyone has access to that? It will look familiar now that you've seen all these polling questions, but it's another great opportunity to provide your input and encourage you to share with your community in Pacifica. We have virtual office hours coming up, and that will be a really great place for you to ask more in-depth questions. I know some folks had more questions than we could get to tonight. In the office hours, it will be 2 1.5-hour blocks where you can schedule a 15-minute appointment, and you'll be able to speak directly with members of the project team on Zoom. And we'll be getting the signups for that out soon and posted to the project website. You'll see us at the pier on October 14th. We'll be out there staffing a table to talk to folks who maybe didn't know about the project and raise awareness. And if you'd like to come visit us there, we'd love to see you. We'll also be doing the same at a farmer's market in October. We're figuring out the date for that one. And then the survey I mentioned, we'll be closing that October 31st. And then we're aiming for December 5th at this moment for our third public meeting. That's a tentative date. We'll be figuring out the next steps for the design and aiming for that time frame. And that is the end of our presentation. Really appreciate all of you taking time out of your evening to be with us tonight, and encourage you to visit the website, take the survey, and schedule office hours with us if you'd like to have that time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Good night.